so you know, chats are recorded.
Okay.
And can be reviewed later.
Thank you. All right, so we'll get started, okay?
All right, we'll get started. Hello, I'm Lucy Handley from the Ridgefield Library, Adult Programs. I'm very happy to welcome this panel of experts for you from Project Resilience. Wait, I'm letting more people in. So let's start with introducing Carol Malstedt, who will be our moderator, and she can introduce everyone else. Welcome, and thank you for coming.
Good evening, Ridgefield. We're happy to see you tonight. Welcome to this Parenting the Selfie Generation, Resilience for Life presentation, which is sponsored by Project Resilience, Ridgefield Public Schools, Ridgefield Youth Commission, and the Ridgefield Library. Tonight's talk is titled, When Back to School Doesn't Mean Back to Normal. And it is our hope that this talk will help us all think about ways to help our kids begin this new school year with a sense of hope, excitement, and curiosity, even if the pandemic is still casting its dark cloud over our lives. So no matter what your questions or concerns may be, we have assembled this panel of experts to help. We are here to discuss anything you wish, beginning with coping strategies, school and community resources, symptoms of depression, anxiety, and substance abuse, as well as how to know when to seek professional help. So ask away. Please feel free to ask your questions by posting them in the chat, which is in a box at the bottom of your screen. While we will not announce identities on the air, please know that this presentation is being recorded and your identity is in the chat. So if that matters to you, you can email me at drcmahls@gmail.com. I'll try to monitor my email during this presentation and we'll get your questions answered. Now we're going to go around and I'm going to ask people to just introduce themselves. So we'll start with Audrey.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Audrey Camino. I am part of Kids in Crisis. I'm actually the Teen Talk Counselor in East Ridge Middle School currently.
Thank you, Audrey. Patricia?
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Patricia Klein. I have a practice in town, and I predominantly work with teens and young adults with a specialization in eating disorders.
Liz Jorgensen?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Liz Jorgensen. I have a practice in town as well, and I'm a specialist in substance use and misuse and addictions, working mostly with teenagers and young adults and families.
Susan Lasky?
Hi, I'm Dr. Susan Lasky. I'm a pediatrician. I work in Stanford at Stanford Health Medical Group, the pediatric center. And I also have 2 kids in the school system. I have a 14-year-old going into 9th grade and a 17-year-old going into 12th grade.
Melanie?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Melanie Pearl. I am a child psychologist in private practice in Ridgefield and also the parent to 2 children in Ridgefield Public Schools, one entering Ridgefield High and one entering East Ridge.
And Sarah?
Hi, my name is Sarah Sved. I am a library media specialist in Connecticut with a background in early childhood education, ed tech, and digital literacy. And I currently work in an elementary setting, and like all teachers around the globe, participated in both remote and hybrid instruction this last year.
So thank you to all the panelists for donating your time. We really, really appreciate this. You have a wealth of expertise. And it just occurred to me that before we get started on the questions, that maybe we should spend some time talking about what the pandemic has been like for you all. Like, what's it been like for you personally? What's it been like professionally? And what has been I'm just streaming this up now, so I'm sorry for the spontaneity. And what helped you get through it in the last year? Anybody want to start?
I can start.
I can start.
Oh, go ahead.
You can start. Yeah, you go.
Well, I'm a teacher. I'm a library media specialist, and I work in an elementary school. And this last year, beginning in March 2020, before shutdown, our team was really tasked with the impossible, thinking it would be for 2 weeks. 2 weeks went to a month. 1 month went to a never-ending, future. And I think if you know any educators or were connected with your own children's teachers, it was quite a task on that end of it. I also have small children in preschool, so they did Zoom school for preschool, and so I got to see that excitement as a parent. And speaking for me professionally, what got me through it was leaning on my team and my colleagues. I have a really amazing, network at my school, and coming together and venting when needed and running ideas by each other all the time, really supported us. And so that was my experience as an educator. Still going through it.
Susan, you had something you wanted to add?
I would say it's obviously, I think, been a long haul for everybody. I think COVID has really had its impact regardless of who you are, how old you are, or what you do for a living. It's definitely been challenging to be in the medical field during this time. It's been rewarding, but also exhausting. I would say for me, watching a big increase in anxiety and depression in children because they were so isolated last year has been very hard. Really sort of having to get my feet under me, not only taking care of people's physical health, but also their emotional health. Something I've always done, but it definitely increased a lot this year, has been a challenge and really hard. And then, also, I said this to the panel before, but my practice is unique in that we've taken care of kids with COVID from the very beginning of this pandemic, just because of the way we were set up and being part of Stanford Health, we've been able to see. So I've seen a lot of kids with COVID this year. So I really do understand the impact that it's had in terms of illness, in terms of long-term illness, and that's been, also really challenging. Personally, exercise always helps me. It kind of clears my head. I love to read, I love to bake, and I would also agree my colleagues and my family have really helped me through it.
What's helped everybody else?
This is Liz here. I surprised myself by how anxious I was about COVID, because I generally tend towards the depressive, not towards the anxious. And I thought I was pretty good. We have 4 grown children, and they're all off and paying all their own bills, etc. And I became very worried about my kids again, very worried. So I just observed that in myself, and I echo what Sarah and the doctor said. I have wonderful colleagues and just really wonderful friends. A lot of my friendships were really, really deepened by us being all more vulnerable with each other, because everybody was frightened. And interestingly enough, some of the people that I thought would be most challenging during COVID were not that way. It's people who I know in my family, in my life, who tend to have anxiety about everything, were actually the most common sense through COVID. Like we just got to get on the list to get vaccinated, And I'm still a little bit, I wait and I follow the rules, like with my practice, like what the doctor was saying. But it seems to me right now like things are in a bit of flux. And I think of all the parents sending kids back. I think we've been aware and reading all the literature and all the research, but I can certainly understand. And if my children were going back to school, I would want to be well informed and have a lot of questions. And my way of coping mostly is getting information. I feel like during COVID, that was sometimes too much, absorbing too much information that wasn't necessarily helpful. So I learned that about myself.
Yeah, you're sort of reminding me of a lot of research that occurred probably back in the 70s and 80s on cancer, clinics, where there are the need to knowers and the not need to knowers. And if doctors give a diagnosis to somebody who does not want to know, it's not a good prognosis. So we need to know whether, I don't need to know person for the most part. I need to know the basics. My husband wants to absorb every little tidbit,
all the information,
and he wants to feed it to me. And so we had to sort of come up with okay, no more COVID talk.
Yeah, no more COVID talk. That's a good one. No more COVID
I want to
talk.
the basics. I want to understand my risk and the rules and all that, but I don't want to go on and on about it. And what helped me was actually like resurrecting old hobbies like quilting and sewing. They're very absorbing, and they require a lot of attention to detail, and it was hugely helpful for me. But you're reminding me, Liz, that we should get to the questions that people are asking, and we'll keep talking. If anybody has other ways that they've coped that they feel like would be helpful, by all means, please share. So let's start with, okay, let's start with Melanie. We have a question for you. My child has been learning at home for so long that I'm afraid he will fight going back to in-person school. How do I help with this transition?
I think it's a reasonable thing for us to expect from a lot of our kids. My clients have been reminding me regularly as we get close to school that this is the third school year that will be impacted by COVID. Not full school year. They're well aware of that. But when they count on their hands, well, I've been in 4th grade, 5th grade, and 6th grade, for them, it's the third school year. And, in any typical school year, can be a difficult transition back from summer. And we're asking our kids to go back into a lot of uncertainty. I know I tend to hear two things from parents. On the one hand, I hear the parents who are saying, oh, no, this child is going to school, regardless of what it takes to get him or her there, this child is going. And then I have the parents that are saying, my kid has some worries and they reflect my own. And so when my kid brings them up that, he's hesitant about going back, I am too. And I ask the parents to sort of sit in their realization of what they're thinking, and similarly do that with your child. We don't have to jump right to, I'm going to solve this, I'm going to figure out how to get you to school. Just because we entertain a child's worries doesn't mean we're entertaining the option of letting them avoid. Those can be two different things. So you can be holding firm the expectation that your child will return to in-person school in the fall, but you can still do a lot of exploring of what specifically are you worried about? What would be helpful? Tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you're feeling. And then as they're talking, do a lot of validating. It makes perfect sense to me that you would feel that way, or you would think that. Normalize. I bet a lot of other kids are feeling that way. Ask them if they've talked to any other kids about how they're feeling, or if this has come up. Some kids are going to want a solution. So you can say to them, what would help you most right now? And if it's, I don't remember the name of the PE teacher, and if we could look up the name of the PE teacher, I'd feel a lot better. That's a really easy problem to solve. If it's, a bigger worry, like some of the things I'm hearing, I don't know if they're going to shut schools down again. I don't know if my friends who were my friends before online learning are still going to be my friends when we go back in person. What if I get sick? What if my teacher gets sick? And then the biggest one I'm hearing is these kids are picking up on, they're hearing people say the kids are far behind, the kids have fallen behind, and they are worried that that's going to mean more stressful classes and more intense homework to try to catch them up. And, if we can hear these things from the kids, we can talk about them and we can provide some reassurance.
Maybe we could pause here, Melanie, because you just brought up two really really important things. One is, so I want the whole group here to chime in. So when a kid goes back to school and they're worried that they've lost their friends, and I've heard this in my practice, that, kids have been out of touch, they're not socializing the way they might normally, they didn't go to the same amount of camps and soccer groups and all that during the summer. So how does a parent help a kid who is worried about where to sit at lunch, or who to talk to on the bus, or what to do during recess? Any thoughts from the group? Like, one of my thoughts for the older kids, like in high school, so I'm just going to chime in here and answer my own question, is that in the high school, kids can go to lunch, see if there's anybody that they know. If there isn't, they can go to the library and they can do some homework, or they can go to the guidance office, and there's usually a room there that's free that they can sit and do some homework. Maybe Audrey, you can help us with this. In the younger grades, in elementary school, that's a lot harder, of course.
Yeah, I would love to chime in if I could.
Please.
So I was definitely working on this with a student at East Ridge where that was an issue. You know, who am I going to sit with? How am I going to make a friend? It's very awkward. I don't know, where do I even begin? And something that I love to do with the students that I know the parents can also do with their kids is role playing, because in role playing, you know, you can do whichever scenario it is. You can do the best case scenario, you can do the worst case scenario, you can do the most likely case scenario. It can also go either way. We don't know, it really depends on the kid, but at least in this case, the child is prepared for, you know, a potential of anything, you know, any scenario that comes up, but at least they're coming into school trying, you know, and they could try again with you, with their teen talk counselor, with anybody, their counselor, anybody it is. So role playing would work.
Any other tips?
I might suggest what
I
we're
also
doing.
tell people.
Oh, no, after
sorry.
you. I think
No,
we keep
go ahead.
jumping in at the same time. You
Doing
first
that.
this time. After you.
I usually tell people to start with something small and safe. Also, like find one friend to connect into or connect in with right away, or have a plan with a friend to meet and sit somewhere with them for lunch. Because it often, if you have one safe moment or one controlled moment, you'll start to sort of feel more comfortable and then sort of start to realize that the bigger group is okay. I often tell people, you know, we create this little comfort zone, this little comfort bubble for ourselves, and we feel super safe in that little bubble. And it feels a little scary to sometimes step out of that bubble, but actually where we realize our strength is usually when we step out of it. So push yourself, just maybe a baby step even for the first step, right? You don't have to go leaps and bounds outside your bubble at the beginning. And then you realize I'm standing outside of it and I'm okay, right? You can take another step. And so I think that's often good too. Or even with younger kids, if they can't coordinate with a friend, maybe coordinate to have a plan with the teacher or the guidance counselor, just to get them in the building so that they feel safe.
Yeah, and I think every elementary school in Ridgefield has lunch bunches. So if a parent is really worried about a child feeling isolated and alone at lunch, they can call the school psychologist or the school principal and arrange for a lunch bunch, which can be hugely helpful if a child's really feeling anxious at unstructured time. Sarah?
With young children, I might even add that you know, an old-fashioned play date, but taking it outside this fall. So we're starting a new school with our daughter, and you know, we'll be calling up friends, kind of cold calls, people we don't know, but you know, meeting up for ice cream or playground or apple picking, you know, some very, you know, outdoor friendly activities where, you know, there can be some support for the kids to connect. And then they have a friend Monday morning that they can, you know, look for.
Carol, that was a good point too, with the lunch bunch groups in elementary. And I think middle school has some lunch groups as well. They may call it something else, but they do a lot of that. And there's also a lot of peer mentoring also in the middle school. And I believe high school may do that as well. So I think there's different ways to reach out if that's definitely a concern of the parent. And sometimes kids will certainly surprise us. And if they see a student that is perhaps not eating with someone, they may call him or her over. And I've seen that happen before. And so we just never know. So I think also as a parent, maybe to reiterate that to our children as well, if you see someone that is being left out or is new to the school, to perhaps just mention that to them.
That's a great suggestion. So I thought we would then move to Sarah, because I think you're an
Carol,
expert.
can I, before you move on, there was a participant with a hand raised. I don't know if that was an accident or if someone wanted to speak.
Oh, yeah.
If that person wants to speak again, can we give them a
Absolutely, but I don't see that on my screen. So
Because I lowered my hand.
there you are.
Hi. Sorry, currently with a newborn. So my name is Shai. I actually am a teacher with the DOE. And I know what we've done with students when it comes down to dealing with the social emotional aspects of learning with COVID is that we've started doing things like SEL activities, especially during lunch period. And we started off with smaller circles, you know, from the restorative practices. and just either talking to the kids about, what do they have, what's fun, what do they miss. And it created for us, because I teach in both middle school and high school, a sort of shared experience with the students to where it didn't feel as lonely. We also did little, I would say clubs, as you guys were talking about, like lunchtime clubs in which there would be a mentor or a teacher who either in their off time or as a hobby of theirs, and students would come, in groups of like 5 or something and discuss it or lead into the activity or talk about it. I personally was talking to students when it comes to things like Marvel movies, anime, and that right there help bridge the gap of students who normally don't talk to each other via Zoom. But once they got into person and started seeing that some of these kids and some of their fellow students shared some of the same experiences, as well as their same hobbies and interests, it created more of a bond between those smaller groups. So that's something you guys could think about doing. I've seen that work in a couple of DOE schools.
It's a great point, Shai. Thank you so much.
No problem.
I think
So-
that really hits home too, that the schools are getting, the school staff, they're getting ready for this.
Right.
It's impossible to imagine if you're not there, which I'm not personally, but the amount of shifting and flexibility and learning that school staff have had to do over the last 3 years, but they continue to do that. And schools are trying to prepare themselves to welcome students back and be more attentive to the social and emotional bit, especially around these transitions.
I totally agree. I think if there's a New York City ticker tape parade, it should be for teachers and healthcare workers. I mean, I don't know
No,
how.
I agree. The teachers and educators do deserve like an award.
Yeah,
It's
they're
been a
an
hard time to be a teacher.
Yes, which
Yeah.
leads us into a
Yeah.
question to Sarah. My child had a difficult time participating in remote learning. If we return to remote learning this year, what can I do to help?
Sure. So I think that this question is one that all learners likely experienced to some degree or another in 2020. I think my first recommendation is if we do go back to remote learning, or I know remote learning may be a status quo for snow days, so it's a good thing to talk about now. And if your child is struggling with that, I would begin by connecting all stakeholders in the conversation. First and foremost, the number one stakeholder is your child. So if your child is willing and able to express their feelings, note these. Other stakeholders to loop in would be your child's teacher and any other team members at the school. And I always think it's a good idea to connect with your child's pediatrician at some point and keep them abreast of the situation. The second step I suggest is beginning with maybe taking an inventory of your environment at home and assessing your child's, I guess we call it technology hygiene, much like you would in establishing healthy sleep hygiene. So as best as the situation permits, is the space that they learn in at home, is it free from distractions? Is there opportunity for flexible seating shifts, perhaps giving them a choice of standing or sitting at different times, or lying down on the floor, especially for really young learners, or maybe moving to a comfortable spot? And I'd invest your learner in this process, have them identify a couple of varied spots to learn in. Another component of digital hygiene is attending to your eyes. This last year, my team and I really emphasized eye health. We're not eye doctors, but we put a lot of time in walking our learners through how to take eye breaks and explaining why we need them. So we suggested things like looking outside a window and soaking in as much natural light as possible between Zooms. At any point, covering your eyes gently and counting to 10 can go a really long way. And several of our older learners began wearing special blue light blocking lenses, and they reported good results with those. Another idea that we brought out was offering sensory input, like in fidget baskets. So my students began crowdsourcing some ideas. So in between, Zooms, or when there was some downtime, maybe doodling. I think that these are new. These poppets, have come out. Silly putty is another one. Just something to like take a quick mental break with. An I Spy book, magazines, even a timer from the dollar store can offer a 1 to 2 minute respite from screen time. I even had some students use essential oils. So if you have access to this in your home, this may be a way to, offer another sensory experience and, give your body, what it needs. And I think fidget toys might be a question mark to some, like, wouldn't this be a distraction for kids? But they do provide some, forced eyes off the screen for little micro breaks. And they can provide some, some input, some sensory input for nervousness and anxiousness that comes from long periods of sitting and tending to a screen. So I think these are all worth trying out. And lastly, I wanted to mention a few ways to approach technology so that it supports your learner. And this might be a discussion you have with your child's educator. And these are some ideas off the top of my head from last year, what I saw commonly. There was a lot of reluctance to being on camera. So a scaffolded approach may be to seek permission for your child to have camera off in group instruction, but maybe turn it on for breakout rooms. If they're reluctant to speak out loud, maybe they can access the chat feature. Sometimes if kids are struggling and it's hard for them to describe it, there may be another underlying thing. So for some of our younger learners, sometimes it might be producing work. Maybe an underlying issue is their keyboard fluency. That's their typing pace, and it impedes their ability to keep up with the pace of the class. And if this is stressing that out, a lot of digital tools have things like speech to text functions or drawing features, or even audio and video comment submissions. And that may give your learner, an alternative way to demonstrate his or her learning. So these are just scratching at the surface at different possibilities that are out there. But it's been my experience that there's always a way, to find the right formula through technology to meet each and every learner where they are.
Those tips are amazing, Sarah. Thank you.
Sure.
So we have a question for Susan Lasky. When should I reach out to my pediatrician if I'm worried about my child's anxiety or sadness? And there's a second question. Is it safe for my child to be in school if they are too young to be vaccinated? The $1 million question.
Exactly. So which one should I start with, I guess? So in terms of reaching out to your pediatrician, I would tell you, with anything, whether it's about anxiety or depression or any other concern, you should never hesitate to reach out to your pediatrician because that's what they're there for. Not only to take care of physical health, but also emotional health, and to be able to guide you on how to find some of these lovely people if you need more than they can provide. So, this has been a year that there's been a tremendous amount of anxiety in kids and a tremendous amount of depression in kids, not only with the social isolation that they had last year, and maybe the fear of having that social isolation again this year. But one of the things I've also been hearing at work, and a lot of concerns are, they had a very normal summer. This summer felt much more normal, I think, than a lot of us thought maybe it would, even in the spring. For a lot of kids, they were not masked. They were at camps, they were outside, they were able to sort of be kids. And now they have to go back into school and sort of re-COVID themselves and be masked and be distanced. And I think a lot of kids and parents are anxious about that. And so I think, talking about it is really important. Addressing that fear that, I think it will be a much more normal year this year, even with masks, and that the likelihood of schools closing significantly this year is actually very low, especially in a town like this with such high vaccine rates. And we learned a lot about COVID in the last 12 to 18 months. And we know a lot about how to prevent people from getting it. And actually the transmission rate in schools last year was very low. Because schools have protocols, right? And so schools follow rules, and the kids follow rules, and the kids and teachers follow protocols, and everybody's going to be masked, at least in the early fall. My guess is that it's going to extend. So that kind of segues into the second question, that yes, I really do think that kids are safe in school. And I actually think it's really imperative and important that they get back to school for so many reasons. I'm not sure we ever realized how important school was until it was taken away, right? And so I mean, I don't mean that. We always knew that our education was important, but I think, you know, it had a lot of impact when it was taken away. And so I do really feel that kids are very safe in school because we do follow protocols. Um, and again, you know, it's very different here than say in some of the southern states like Florida, where I have a lot of concerns about kids being in school currently. But here, where we're going to try to maintain a 3 to 6 foot distance, where kids are going to be instructed to hand wash or hand sanitize regularly, where we're going to be masked regularly, where hopefully people are honest about symptom reporting and not sending sick children to school, which people were really good about last year. That I do think it's really safe for kids to be in school this year. To segue, just to say, you know, the vaccine for kids younger than 12 got delayed. It was supposed to actually come out this summer, but the FDA asked both Pfizer and Moderna to double the size of their studies. So I don't know if people know this, so I'm just going to say it out loud. So they're doing that, and so it should be late fall, maybe as late as early 2022, but that's when it's expected.
Thank you for sharing that. That's good news. And
Yeah,
actually,
no
I
worries.
think you brought up a really good point that I just wanted to insert myself. And this is about the impact of school and not being able to go to school. A lot of kids said to me, I can't wait to go back to school. I'm so lonely, I'm so bored, or I want to get away from my siblings or my parents. I can't wait to be in school again. And I think it can be helpful to remind kids of that, you know, that you missed school and you do know how to do this. You know, yes, we don't want to do it again. Yes, this is a drag, but you got through it. Like we got through a year, you did okay. It wasn't great, but we all got through it. The whole world is going through this. And it can help to sort of like remind them that they are resilient, and they did miss school. Which a lot of kids were surprised by that, I think. And it was funny to hear them sort of acknowledge it. Okay, so let's move on. We have a question for Liz. So let's talk about teenagers now. So we have a question about from a parent about their teen. I suspect my teen has been partying over the summer. How do I know when adolescent experimenting is something more and something I should be worried about? And what should I do?
That's a great question. And I want to give a little caveat before I say what I'm about to say, that I'm in no way endorsing teenagers abusing substances, but I do need to reflect back on the monitoring the future. It's a study that's done every 2 years, and it really does accurately reflect teenage behavior. They go from 8th grade to 12th grade and ask all kinds of questions about mental health and substance abuse, etc. And one piece of good news from that survey is the use of so it doesn't just reflect monitoring the future what happened during COVID. It was reported in 2020 for the 2 years before. But it's called Monitoring the Future survey. And usually it's out of the University of Michigan, and CDC publishes it conjointly every 2 years. But the disturbing trend that's been shown for about 10 years is that teenagers' attitudes towards marijuana and marijuana products being dangerous is gone down to the point where, like, it's no big deal, and they do, for the most part, do not believe these substances are harmful. Binge drinking has kind of stabilized, but it's still an issue. But luckily, it seems from this survey and other surveys, that's just the best one that's done every couple of years, that teenagers have really gotten the message about, for the most part, about prescription drug abuse. That was a real issue a number of years ago. Many of us were on panels about that. That being said, so here's why I had to do the caveat. Just because something's a norm among teenagers doesn't mean that it's okay or it's benign. And a plethora of different studies have shown that the higher an economic reference group, so the higher the overall income is in any one zip code, it's a very good predictor of an increased rate of both alcohol abuse and also illicit drug use. So marijuana and other drugs, but most frequently we're talking about marijuana and marijuana products why am I saying marijuana products or cannabis products? What most parents don't know is the current favorite mode of use for THC or cannabis are concentrated substances that are, they
Vapes.
look similar to a vaping pen for nicotine,
Yeah, the
but they're
vapes.
highly concentrated marijuana, and they are much more dangerous in terms of the brain development of the child and also some of the symptoms that kids get. And what's a little nefarious about it is there's no smell. There's very little smell or telltale sign of it. And many surveys show that kids just think like, okay, weed is no big deal. And they were thinking this already before it was legalized in Connecticut, but we may see a little fallout for that. And alcohol is still always the number two. So marijuana is the number one thing abused by teenagers in our economic reference group, and alcohol number two. So some studies have shown up to 75 to 80% of teenagers in high economic reference groups will try marijuana by their senior year of high school. So again, I'm not saying that I like this, but when I first started my career, that number was in the 30s. So by senior year, it was only about 30 something percent of people tried it. So it was what was more aberrant in the past is now a norm. And again, I'm not saying that's okay, but teenagers, just like adults, tend to go with what peers are doing. So many kids will experiment or try marijuana and will try alcohol, obviously, through high school. One thing that I want parents to be aware is the prevention age you want to target is 7th grade to 8th grade, because about 14% of 8th graders have tried marijuana, again, in the economic reference group we live in. And it's parents' job to set firm limits and expectations about the fact that there's no safe use of marijuana at all as a teenager. And the only safe use of alcohol would be family or religious a ritual orientation of using alcohol, like say in at a bar mitzvah or a setting like that. And you have to say that over and over and over again to teenagers. Now, if you've already set the rules to answer the question and your teenager keeps bucking against the rules and has consequences related to their use, that's a red flag. It isn't a red flag regarding a lifetime expectation of substance use, but generally the kids who cannot contain their behavior around substance use, when parents are being firm and calm with limits and expectations, generally those kids have underlying anxiety and or underlying depression or perhaps unresolved trauma. So you want to kind of see ongoing substance abuse as like the canary in the coal mine saying, uh-oh, something else is going on. And I always say this, and just that being the mother of 4 grown children, you'll never regret accidentally driving your child in for an assessment, with a qualified professional. And it's a good rule of thumb to just have mental health hygiene and an awareness of mental health, as Susan said, is just part of health. And I wouldn't ignore if your child constantly is pushing those boundaries. But a couple of boundaries, in fact, my grown kids think it's very funny now to tell me about things I didn't know that they did when they were teenagers. I don't really think it's that funny, but a couple of them that I didn't think had abused any substances, tried alcohol, etc. So using it doesn't mean a panic. A constant pattern where they're caught and they maybe behave for a little while and then they push back out and they push back out. You really want to have a professional's opinion if there's anything else going on for them. It's also a myth that it's not a big deal, like if kids are binge drinking, etc., because they all have to learn before they go to college. Really, in general, even if teenagers push some of the limits, teenagers follow, for the most part, the guidelines their parents set. So if parents are too laissez-faire about any of the rules, or parents themselves are demonstrating lack of control with their own substance use, those are the kids that tend to go out in the skew and have more difficulty. Not always, but often. So I don't know if that answers it.
That was a very great comprehensive answer to the question. Thank you, Liz. That was really helpful. And now we have a question slightly different. This is for Patricia Klein. This is about eating disorders. In what ways can I support my child as he or she returns to school and coping with his or her body image, his body image anxiety, eating habits, and exercise routines as we move in and out of these fluid COVID times?
So, unfortunately, we have seen a rise in disordered eating patterns and behaviors, and relapses of eating disorders during COVID. So what does that have to do now in terms of those kids returning to school? Well, I think it was mentioned very early on, and I think Melanie had referred to it in terms of kids already having this reentry anxiety, returning to school. You know, some kids haven't been in a school building in 17 months now. So we already have that sort of foundation, that layer of getting back into the building. Kids are hitting puberty, have reached puberty, so that's reflective of that. And now some kids have perhaps gained weight, lost weight, so we have this sort of additional layer, and there's a lot that they're dealing with. So what I highly recommend to parents, and I've gotten this, is to certainly refer to your school nurse. Allow your kids to have a safe haven, a place where they can go to in school if they need a break. If they need to bring prepared meals, by all means, please, please, please communicate with someone in the building. It shouldn't be secretive by any means. You need to communicate. I think that's highly effective. And so that if the student, again, needs to take a break or leave class or what have you to collect their thoughts, please do so. It can be, you know, a school psychologist. Again, the nurse is always a safe bet. What we've seen a lot of too is, you know, I think this was also referenced earlier on in our session tonight. Kids have been reluctant to keep their videos on, and it may have been assumed to have been somewhat of a defined behavior at times. I've heard a lot of that. Teachers coming down hard on kids or taking away points. I've heard a lot of my clients have been telling me, you know what, I cannot look at myself on that screen. So, you know, they're on the screen 6 hours a day, and they're just really subconsciously or consciously aware. So I think these are things that they're bringing to our attention, and we need to listen to them with quite intent and really just listen to what they're communicating to us. And I think that's a really big deal. So let's not just make assumptions that, you know, they're turning their videos off because then maybe they're falling asleep or whatever the case may be. But again, sort of with this re-entry to school and kids with body dysmorphic disorders and what we've seen, and I stated this when we first had our conversation at the end of the school year, was another thing to really pay attention to as parents, caretakers, guardians, is the Snapchat and TikToks. And, you know, we cannot filter our bodies and our bodies in the real world. So let's be mindful of what they're doing. Please be careful and, again, just super attentive to what they're doing with their gadgets and devices.
You know, you raise a really good point, Patricia, because any parent can access extra help in the school by asking for a 504 team meeting, where kids with really special needs, like prepared meals or permission to leave, not go to lunch or to leave a class or to have extra support because they're depressed or anxious or having any other trouble, can ask for, you know, a 504 meeting through the guidance department in any school. It's a law. But I'm just thinking about, you know, the kinds of kids you're talking about who might need that, and parents might not know that there is help available in the schools for that kind of thing.
Excellent point. So sure, you can get a note from their physician. You know, I've written notes out plenty of times. So please, absolutely, whether it's a nutritionist, physician, psychologist, whatever team that you're working with, please do exactly that. That's a great point, Carol. Yeah.
And it brings us to Audrey. So talk to us about the resources in schools, especially the Teen Talk counselors in East Ridge, Scotts Ridge, and the high school.
Yep, exactly. So I know that sometimes, because the kids do have their guidance counselors, I know in East Ridge there isn't a social worker, but there are two great school psychologists, and there's many adults in the building and in the other schools as well that the kids can go to as a resource, as a trusted adult, or if something were to happen, if they need to talk, they're just upset throughout the day, or of course school's about to start, so the anxiety about going to class, about who am I going to sit with. So as far as a resource, and then us as well as in kids in crisis being inside of the two middle schools and the high school, they can use us as a resource, as far as not only getting to vent about what's going on, either that period, that day, the worries about the future involving school, but we get to work with them on whatever it is they need to cater to their needs, whether it be developing coping skills, which they may already have in place, or they may be the first time they're learning about it, or if there's any other crisis going on, how us, the Teen Talk person, or it could be the counselors or whoever it may be that they trust, can help guide them through their next steps. What is it that they can do? But more specifically to the Teen Talk program that Ridgefield does have inside the middle school and then high schools, we're trained in crisis counseling as well, not just for the children, but for their families. If it is a family issue that's going on, that we can, because Teen Talk, it is a short-term support, because, we can't follow them in the summer or when they're on vacation or anything. But we can refer them to an appropriate long-term care or anything that is appropriate for them in the community that they can go and reach out to. So as far as resources, those are the tremendous resources in the adults in the building, whether it be the nurse or the counselors, like I said. So,
and I think it's important for parents to know that the kids who see you through Teen Talk, you're actually not hired by the school system, so that the records and the privacy is very confidential. It's not a part of the child's record. It's completely private.
yep, exactly.
I
And
don't
so
think people quite understand that.
yes, of course. So what I do always explain to the kids, because I have had parents reach out to me and just trying to put their own kids on my radar, letting them know, just to keep an eye out, or maybe to talk to them once I get the child also on board, because it is important for the child to consent to wanting to talk to somebody. I'm not going to force anyone to speak to me, but as far as the confidentiality, I do let the kids know, especially when they come on their own, without discussing it first with mom and dad or their parents. I let them know the general confidentiality, which is why I would need to break from it or let somebody else know what we're just talking about, and it's, if they want to hurt themselves, somebody wants to hurt them, or they're going to hurt somebody else. If I don't hear any of that, and it's just, general conversation, if they need some guidance, if they need any of that, and it isn't a safety risk, that's really where I know that the kids appreciate that conversation with myself as a trusted adult, or the other Teen Talk counselors in the other schools. So it's a huge component.
So we're coming to a close. I wondered whether anybody had anything they want to add that as we were talking.
I think there's a question in the chat.
Yeah, so I was going to get to that actually. And I think it might be for Patricia. Are there body positivity lessons that use the lens of media literacy in the high school? I'm not quite
So
sure.
I don't know particularly if there's anything specific to the high school. That's actually a great question. I'd love to know myself. But what I would say is, if there's any sort of resources that one would like to look into or take advantage of, the National Eating Disorder Association has a wonderful, tremendous website. And if there's any time to take advantage of social media where it's a positive reflection, they have some great talks and podcasts on Instagram. And also Renfrew They are eating recovery. They have great programs and they have a great website as well. So RENFREW. So I definitely recommend those sites. And there's some other reputable websites as well. So I'm happy if anyone wanted to email me or further address that as well. But in particular, in terms of actual in the schools, that's a great question. I don't know that if that was specifically to. I don't know if Audrey has any insight into what happens.
Well, I know they cover eating disorders in the health curriculum in the high school, but I think it's brief and pretty limited, but that's about all I know. And Lori Brand couldn't be here tonight, so.
Common Sense Media is a great go-to for media resources, not only for educators, but for families as well. They do have body image lessons that are, I think, as early as 5th grade, maybe even younger, but then certainly for 6, 8, and 9, 12 bands. So that's a great thing to consult too. And that's through media literacy, you know, and the digital world.
Good tip, Sarah.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything they want to add? I mean, I do want to close out by thanking every single one of you for giving us your time, your expertise, your thoughts as we enter this new school year. I hope, fingers crossed, right, that we start the school year. I mean, I keep thinking of when I sent my kids off to school and I would pack their lunches in the backpacks for that first day and they would pick out their outfits and how excited they were. And I just can't even imagine what it's like to put kids on the bus with all of that. And then this worry about
extra masks
and hand sanitizer. And will I have somebody to sit with at lunch? And do I want to sit next to somebody on the bus or do I get my own seat? And yeah, it's, you know, so kudos to all the parents out there. We really appreciate you. Educators, I have no words. That's all I can say. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, healthcare professionals also. So thank you guys. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the summer. And let's pray for a really, really incident-free school year.
Thank you one and all from the library.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.